Victoria Chen stood in the marble foyer of her family's mansion, adjusting her black belt around her waist with practiced precision. At 19, she had everything money could buy: designer clothes, expensive cars, and a third-degree black belt in Taekwondo that she wore like a crown. Her parents, successful tech entrepreneurs, had given her every advantage in life, including the best martial arts training money could provide. The Chen mansion was a testament to wealth, with its crystal chandeliers, imported Italian marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked perfectly manicured gardens. Victoria had grown up in this world of privilege where servants catered to her every need, and her word was rarely questioned. She had learned early that money and status commanded respect, or at least the appearance of it. Today was different, though. Her parents had hired a new housekeeping service, and Victoria was curious about the new staff. She had heard whispers from the other employees that the new maid was unusual somehow, but no one would elaborate when she pressed for details. Victoria didn't particularly care about the help, but she enjoyed knowing everything that happened in her domain. As she descended the grand staircase, her martial arts uniform rustling softly with each step, Victoria spotted someone she didn't recognize. A woman in her mid-20s was carefully dusting the expensive artwork in the hallway. She was small in stature, perhaps 5 feet 2 inches, with quiet movements and an unassuming presence that made her almost invisible among the grandeur of the mansion. The new maid wore a simple gray uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She worked methodically, treating each piece of art with the care and attention it deserved. There was something different about her posture, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite her humble position. Victoria noticed that unlike the other staff members, this woman didn't look nervous or intimidated by the opulent surroundings. Victoria's curiosity was piqued, but not in a friendly way. She had always enjoyed asserting her dominance over the household staff, finding small ways to remind them of their place in the social hierarchy. It was a game to her, one that fed her ego and reinforced her sense of superiority. She approached the woman with the confident stride of someone who had never been challenged in her own home. The maid looked up as Victoria approached, offering a polite nod of acknowledgement. Her eyes were calm and steady, showing neither fear nor excessive deference. This immediately struck Victoria as odd, as most new employees were either overly eager to please or visibly nervous around her. This woman seemed neither impressed nor intimidated by Victoria's presence. Victoria stopped directly in front of the maid, her black belt prominently displayed, arms crossed in a posture designed to intimidate. She had used this stance countless times before, and it never failed to make the staff uncomfortable. But as she studied the woman's face, she saw no change in expression, no sign that her intimidation tactics were having any effect. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows created long shadows across the marble floor, and in that moment Victoria felt an unusual stirring of something she couldn't quite identify. It wasn't respect or admiration, but rather a puzzling sense that she was missing something important about this unremarkable-looking woman who cleaned her family's home. Without saying a word, Victoria turned and walked away. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was just the beginning of something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about power, respect, and what it truly meant to be strong. The seed of confrontation had been planted, and Victoria's pride would ensure it grew into something much larger than a simple misunderstanding between employer and employee. Over the next few days, Victoria found herself increasingly irritated by the new maid's presence. The woman, who she learned was named Maria Santos, continued to work with the same quiet efficiency that had first caught her attention. But what bothered Victoria most was that Maria seemed completely unaffected by the usual power dynamics that governed the household. While other staff members would lower their eyes when Victoria passed, Maria would simply nod politely and continue with her work. When Victoria made unreasonable demands or complained about minor imperfections, the other employees would scramble to fix things immediately. Maria, however, would listen calmly, acknowledge the request, and then complete her tasks at her own steady pace, always to perfection. Victoria's friends from the country club had come over for their weekly gathering, and she was eager to show off her martial arts skills. The group of wealthy teenagers often entertained themselves by discussing their various accomplishments and the expensive hobbies their parents funded. Victoria's black belt was her particular source of pride, and she enjoyed demonstrating her kicks and punches for her impressed audience. As they moved through the house toward the private gym, they encountered Maria polishing the banister of the main staircase. Victoria saw an opportunity to assert her dominance in front of her friends, and decided to make Maria the target of her show of power. She had been looking for the right moment to put this mysteriously confident maid in her place. Victoria stopped abruptly, causing her entourage of friends to halt behind her. She looked directly at Maria, who continued polishing the wooden banister with careful attention to detail. The afternoon sun created a warm glow in the hallway, but Victoria's expression was cold as she prepared to make her move. With deliberate slowness, Victoria moved closer to Maria, her black belt swaying with each step. Her friends watched with anticipation, recognizing the signs that Victoria was about to provide them with entertainment at someone else's expense. They had witnessed her verbal takedowns of other staff members before, and they expected this encounter to follow the same pattern. Maria looked up from her work, meeting Victoria's gaze with the same calm expression she always wore. There was no challenge in her eyes, but there was also no submission. She simply waited, cloth in hand, for whatever Victoria had planned to say. This composed reaction only fueled Victoria's irritation further. Victoria decided to start with something that had been bothering her since Maria's first day. She pointed to a spot on the banister that Maria had just cleaned and declared it wasn't good enough. Her voice carried the tone of someone who expected immediate compliance and visible distress from the person being criticized. Her friends giggled softly behind her, anticipating the maid's embarrassed reaction. But Maria simply looked at the spot Victoria indicated, examined it carefully, and then resumed polishing with the same methodical attention she had shown before. She didn't apologize frantically or show signs of panic like the other staff members typically did when Victoria criticized their work. Instead, she worked with quiet dignity, as if Victoria's criticism was simply another piece of information to consider rather than a judgment from a superior. This calm response infuriated Victoria even more. She was accustomed to seeing immediate results from her intimidation tactics, and Maria's composed reaction made her feel as though her authority was being challenged. Her friends were watching, expecting entertainment, and Victoria felt pressure to escalate the situation to maintain her reputation as someone who commanded respect and fear from the household staff. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal truths about strength, respect, and character that Victoria had never considered. Her pride and need to dominate were pushing her toward a moment that would change everything she thought she understood about power and what it meant to be truly formidable. Victoria's frustration reached a boiling point as Maria continued to work with unshakable composure. The lack of fear or deference that Victoria expected was driving her to take more drastic measures. She decided that subtle intimidation wasn't enough, and that she needed to make a more dramatic statement in front of her audience of wealthy friends. With theatrical flair, Victoria began to demonstrate some of her martial arts moves near Maria, executing high kicks and sharp punches in the air. Her movements were precise and powerful, the result of years of expensive training and countless hours in the dojo. The black belt around her waist served as a visible symbol of her martial arts prowess, and she made sure it was prominently displayed as she moved. Her friends applauded and made admiring comments about Victoria's skill, which only encouraged her to become more dramatic in her display. She wanted to make it clear to Maria that she was dealing with someone who possessed not only wealth and social status, but also physical capabilities that could be dangerous if provoked. The message was clear: respect me or face the consequences. Maria paused in her cleaning and watched Victoria's demonstration with what appeared to be polite interest. She didn't seem frightened or impressed, but rather observed the martial arts display with the same calm attention she gave to everything else. When Victoria finished her routine and looked expectantly at Maria for some reaction, the maid simply nodded acknowledgement and returned to her polishing. This response was not what Victoria had hoped for. She expected fear, submission, or at least some sign that her message had been received. Instead, Maria's reaction suggested that she viewed Victoria's martial arts display as nothing more than an interesting interruption to her workday. The lack of intimidation in Maria's demeanor was becoming a personal affront to Victoria's sense of superiority. Emboldened by her friend's encouragement and frustrated by Maria's composure, Victoria decided to escalate further. She began making disparaging comments about Maria's work, her appearance, and her social status. Her words became increasingly cruel as she tried desperately to provoke some kind of emotional response that would validate her sense of dominance and superiority. Victoria mocked Maria's simple uniform, criticized her technique for cleaning, and made snide remarks about people who had to work as maids to survive. Her friends laughed along, caught up in the moment and encouraged by Victoria's confident cruelty. The hallway echoed with their laughter and Victoria's increasingly harsh words. Throughout this verbal assault, Maria continued working steadily. She didn't respond to the insults or show any sign that Victoria's words were affecting her. Her hands moved with the same careful precision. Her posture remained straight and dignified, and her expression stayed calm and focused. It was as if Victoria's attempts at humiliation were simply background noise that didn't deserve acknowledgement. This unflappable response pushed Victoria beyond rational thought. Her need to assert dominance had become an obsession, and Maria's refusal to be intimidated felt like a personal challenge to everything Victoria believed about herself and her place in the world. The wealth, the martial arts training, the social status that had always guaranteed her respect and fear from others seemed powerless against this quiet woman who simply continued cleaning. Victoria's friends began to sense that something was different about this interaction. They had seen Victoria intimidate staff members before, but this time, her target seemed completely immune to the tactics that usually worked so effectively. The atmosphere in the hallway grew tense as Victoria's frustration became more obvious, and her need to win this psychological battle intensified. The confrontation was building toward a moment that would test everything both women believed about strength, character, and what it truly meant to command respect. Victoria's privilege and training were about to collide with something she had never encountered before, and the outcome would surprise everyone in that marble hallway. Victoria's patience finally snapped completely. The combination of her friends watching, her frustration at being ignored, and her desperate need to prove her dominance pushed her past the point of rational behavior. She decided that words and intimidation weren't enough, and that she needed to make a physical statement that would finally force Maria to acknowledge her superiority. In a moment of reckless pride, Victoria positioned herself directly in front of Maria and began executing more aggressive martial arts moves. She threw punches that stopped just inches from Maria's face, performed high kicks that came dangerously close to her body, and used every intimidation technique she had learned in her years of training. Her friends gasped with excitement, believing they were witnessing Victoria's ultimate display of dominance. Maria stopped her cleaning entirely now, setting down her cloth and facing Victoria directly. For the first time since the confrontation began, she gave Victoria her complete attention. But instead of the fear or submission Victoria expected to see, there was something else in Maria's eyes. A quiet assessment, as if she were evaluating a situation that required careful consideration. Victoria interpreted Maria's attention as a sign that her intimidation tactics were finally working. Emboldened by what she saw as progress, she became even more aggressive in her display. She began throwing kicks and punches even closer to Maria's body, creating a dangerous game of physical intimidation that could easily cross the line into actual assault. Her friends watched in fascination, some beginning to feel uncomfortable with how far Victoria was taking this confrontation. They had seen her be cruel with words before, but this physical aggression was something new and more troubling. However, none of them spoke up to stop her, too caught up in the drama and too afraid of becoming Victoria's next target. Maria's response was completely unexpected. Instead of cowering or backing away from Victoria's increasingly dangerous movements, she began to move with fluid grace that seemed effortless and natural. As Victoria threw a particularly aggressive punch toward her face, Maria simply shifted slightly to the side, allowing the punch to pass harmlessly by without any apparent effort. Victoria was momentarily confused by how easily Maria had avoided her attack. She tried again, this time with a high kick that should have forced Maria to duck or stumble backward. Instead, Maria moved with liquid smoothness, somehow managing to avoid the kick while maintaining her balanced, centered stance. There was no panic in her movement, no rushed scrambling to get out of the way. The realization began to dawn on Victoria that something was very wrong with her assumptions about this quiet maid. Maria's movements weren't those of someone trying desperately to avoid being hurt. They were controlled, precise, and seemingly effortless. There was a quality to her motion that spoke of training and discipline that Victoria was only beginning to recognize. Maria's calm voice finally broke the tension in the hallway. She spoke quietly but clearly, asking Victoria if she was finished with her demonstration. There was no anger in her tone, no fear, and no disrespect. She simply asked the question as if Victoria's aggressive display had been nothing more than an extended performance that had run its course. This response shocked Victoria more than any show of fear or submission could have. Maria was treating her dangerous martial arts attacks as if they were merely an interesting display, rather than a serious physical threat. The confidence required to remain so calm in the face of Victoria's aggression suggested something that Victoria's privileged mind was struggling to process. Victoria's friends had fallen silent, no longer laughing or encouraging her behavior. They were beginning to sense that this confrontation was not going the way any of them had expected. The atmosphere in the hallway had shifted from entertainment to something much more serious and unpredictable. The moment of truth was approaching rapidly. Victoria's pride wouldn't allow her to back down now, but Maria's responses were challenging everything she thought she knew about power, intimidation, and what it meant to be truly formidable. The collision between Victoria's assumptions and Maria's reality was about to create a revelation that would change everyone's understanding of the situation. Victoria's confusion and frustration reached a critical point. Maria's effortless avoidance of her attacks and calm demeanor were completely outside her experience. In all her years of martial arts training, she had never encountered someone who could move with such fluid grace while remaining so composed. Her instructors at the expensive dojo had always praised her skills, and she had dominated every sparring partner she had faced. Determined to prove her superiority once and for all, Victoria decided to make one final decisive move. She stepped back to give herself room and prepared to execute her most impressive technique, a spinning heel kick that she had perfected through years of practice. This move had always been her signature technique, one that demonstrated both her flexibility and power. Surely this would finally force Maria to show the fear and respect that Victoria demanded. Victoria launched into the spinning kick with all the power and precision she could muster. Her form was technically perfect, the result of countless hours of training and refinement. Her friends held their breath, expecting to see Maria finally overwhelmed by Victoria's superior martial arts abilities. The kick was fast, powerful, and aimed to stop just inches from Maria's head as the ultimate intimidation tactic. But something went wrong. As Victoria spun through the air, Maria moved in a way that was so subtle and precise that it seemed almost supernatural. Instead of backing away or ducking, Maria stepped forward at exactly the right moment and in exactly the right direction. Her movement was so perfectly timed that Victoria's kick, which should have stopped harmlessly in the air, instead found Victoria off balance and vulnerable. In one smooth, flowing motion, Maria gently redirected Victoria's momentum using principles that Victoria didn't understand. There was no violence in the movement, no aggressive counterattack, just a perfect application of leverage and timing that sent Victoria tumbling to the marble floor in a controlled fall that prevented any injury. Maria had somehow turned Victoria's own technique against her without appearing to use any force at all. Victoria found herself sitting on the cold marble floor, her black belt askew and her confidence completely shattered. She looked up at Maria, who stood exactly where she had been before, looking down at Victoria with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the entire confrontation. There was no triumph in her eyes, no mockery, just quiet observation of the situation that had just unfolded. The silence in the hallway was deafening. Victoria's friends stared in shock, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The girl who had dominated every physical confrontation in their experience had been effortlessly neutralized by someone they had dismissed as just a maid. The power dynamics they thought they understood had been completely reversed in a matter of seconds. Maria reached down and offered her hand to help Victoria up from the floor. Her gesture was polite and respectful, showing no sign that she viewed what had just happened as a victory or defeat. She was simply offering assistance to someone who had fallen, treating the moment with the same dignity she brought to everything else she did. Victoria stared at the offered hand for a long moment, her mind racing to understand what had just occurred. Her martial arts training told her that what Maria had done should have been impossible for someone without extensive training. The effortless way Maria had neutralized her attack suggested a level of skill that far exceeded anything Victoria had encountered in her years of expensive lessons. Slowly, the realization began to dawn on Victoria that she had made a terrible mistake in her assumptions about this quiet woman. Maria's humble job and unassuming appearance had hidden something extraordinary, and Victoria's arrogance had blinded her to the truth until it was too late to avoid humiliation. The moment stretched on as Victoria sat on the floor, faced with a choice that would define not just this encounter, but her understanding of herself and what it meant to possess real strength. The marble beneath her felt cold and unforgiving, much like the reality that was finally breaking through her privileged assumptions about the world. Victoria slowly accepted Maria's offered hand and allowed herself to be helped up from the marble floor. As she stood brushing off her martial arts uniform, she found herself looking at Maria with completely different eyes. The woman who had seemed so unremarkable just minutes ago now appeared to possess depths that Victoria was only beginning to comprehend. With her curiosity finally overcoming her pride, Victoria asked the question that had been building in her mind since the moment she found herself on the floor. She wanted to know who Maria really was and how she had managed to neutralize Victoria's attack so effortlessly. Her voice was quieter now, lacking the arrogant tone that had characterized all her previous interactions with the household. Staff Maria's response was delivered with the same calm dignity she had shown throughout their entire encounter. She explained that before coming to work as a maid, she had been a professional martial arts instructor for over 8 years. She held multiple black belts in different disciplines and had competed at national and international levels. Financial circumstances and family obligations had forced her to take whatever work she could find, which led her to housekeeping. The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. Maria continued, explaining that she had recognized Victoria's martial arts training immediately, but had chosen not to make an issue of it. She had encountered many students like Victoria over the years, technically proficient but lacking in the deeper understanding of what martial arts truly represented. Maria had hoped to avoid any confrontation by simply doing her job quietly and professionally. Victoria's friends remained silent, processing the complete reversal of everything they thought they understood about the situation. The person they had viewed as entertainment, someone beneath their notice, had revealed herself to be far more accomplished than any of them in the very area where Victoria claimed superiority. Their assumption that wealth and privilege automatically conferred superiority had been shattered. Maria went on to explain some of the fundamental principles that Victoria's expensive training had apparently never covered. True martial arts weren't about intimidation or domination, but about discipline, respect, and self-control. The ability to avoid conflict was considered a higher skill than the ability to win one. Strength wasn't measured by how effectively you could intimidate others, but by how well you could control yourself and protect those who needed protection. As Maria spoke, Victoria began to understand how shallow and incomplete her martial arts education had been. She had learned techniques and earned belts, but she had missed the deeper philosophy that should have guided her actions. Her instructors at the expensive dojo had focused on her family's ability to pay rather than ensuring she understood the responsibility that came with her training. The humiliation Victoria felt was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just the physical defeat, but the realization that her entire worldview had been based on false assumptions. She had believed that money could buy respect, that privilege conferred strength, and that her position in society made her superior to people like Maria. Every one of those beliefs had been proven wrong in the span of a few minutes. Maria finished speaking and calmly picked up her cleaning supplies, preparing to continue with her work as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She showed no signs of gloating or superiority, treating the entire incident as a learning opportunity rather than a victory. Her behavior demonstrated the very principles she had just explained, using her skills only when necessary and showing respect, even for someone who had shown her none. Victoria's friends began to disperse, uncomfortable with the silence and unsure how to process what they had witnessed. The entertainment they had expected had become something much more serious and educational. As they left, Victoria remained in the hallway with Maria, finally beginning to understand the difference between having martial arts training and truly understanding what it meant. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the marble floor where Victoria had fallen. In those shadows, she saw a reflection of her own character, impressive on the surface but lacking substance when tested. Maria's quiet dignity and genuine strength had exposed the emptiness behind Victoria's arrogant facade, leaving her with a choice about who she wanted to become.